Okay, welcome everybody to the fall semester workshop midterm briefings. This is the part of the semester where we have now all come up with our program designs, which is an effort to take the statutes that we've been working with and figuring out what will we actually do in 2021. The rest of the semester will be devoted to figuring out who's going to do the work, how it'll get done, when it'll get done, how much it'll cost, and how we'll know if it's happening. So at this point, we're ready to hear from our groups on their program design, and we'll be beginning with Professor Cass's group on water power research and development. So let's take it away.
Good morning and good evening. I am Carol, and today I will be presenting on behalf of the Potential Power team for the midterm briefing. I would like to thank my team, Liz Wilson and Anna Nikolova, for all the effort and collaborations. And I would like to thank our manager, Rachel Gutgel, and Drew Poling, our faculty advisor, Lloyd Cass, for all the support. Today, the goal of this presentation is to inform you with the exciting program objectives, our program designs, and why we should care for water power. We will start by reviewing the current issues and background information. Then we will look at the main program objectives. And finally, we will review the program designs. So water power, including hydropower and marine energy, as an essential part of the clean energy transition. However, unlike wind, solar, and battery storage, which have experienced rapid growth in recent years, water power is lagging behind. This varied collection of water technology has the potential to provide clean energy, energy storage, and flexibility in a decarbonized energy system. New York State is aggressively including hydropower and pump storage in its green energy future. But there will need to be an investment for financial capital, human capital, and intellectual capital if we are to harness the full potential of water power. This piece of legislation will address these problems. So HR 6084 aims to reauthorize the funding for the Water Power Technology Office. It is designed to expand programs for hydropower, pump storage, and marine energy capacities within the United States through research, development, and demonstration. This program also has broader implications on topics such as reducing fossil fuel dependence. In addition, it had bipartisan support and was well supported in states with existing marine energy research programs. Here, we distill current issues into 4 areas: hydropower reliability, marine technology commercialization, workforce development, and inclusion and equity. First of all, the aging infrastructure and long permitting time inhibit the hydropower reliability. Currently, applications for permits to retrofit can take up to 10 years to be approved, as they are reviewed by multiple departments. Separately, marine technology is still at its very initial stage and requires government research fundings before private sectors can even get involved. In order to keep the path with the technical development, we also need more programs and skilled workers to meet the market demand. Finally, the lack of diversity in the workforce and minority representatives in the decision-making process have long been an issue in the industry. Therefore, we design objectives and solutions to these issues respectively. The first objective we will look at is increase hydropower reliability and resilience. The program we have designed will reduce the amount of time it takes to process permits for upgrading dams and existing hydropower infrastructure. This photo shows the Boise River Diversion Power Plant. It originally came online in 1912. By 1982, it was in need of serious repair and was taken offline. Additionally, the historic design meant that it could not operate in low river flow conditions without manual interventions. This was too inefficient for modern generation standards. Research into upgrades began in 1990, but a permit was not granted until 2000. The upgrade was a huge success, allowing the plant to run efficiently in all river conditions and doubling the power output. Therefore, the shorter permitting time will allow more hydropower plants to achieve similar results. Our program will confine the application review to a single department, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. Streamlining the permitting process by confining it to one department will reduce the burden on the applicants, eliminate redundancy within the review process, and accelerating the permitting process. This results in more dams and hydropower infrastructure being retrofitted, leading to increased efficiency and resiliency. Moreover, dams and infrastructures will withstand the changing weather pattern better. Moreover, retrofitting and upgrading can involve converting a non-power dam into a hydropower generating facility or upgrading technology at existing hydropower plants to improve efficiency, reliability, safety, and local ecological impacts. Separately, for the marine energy, there are currently 3 university-administered national marine renewable energy centers. They are located in Hawaii, Pacific, and Southeast. These centers are working to help accelerate the commercial implementation of marine technology. Adding centers to a network will leverage strategic locations along America's coastlines with energy potential, while developing the country's marine power workforce and research capacities. It is also crucial to renew the fundings for the existing centers. So the second objective is to strengthen the national marine renewable energy centers and promote marine technology commercialization. These centers are America's leading ocean energy research facilities and demonstration sites. As you can see on this graph, most marine energy are in the research and applied development stage. The value of that is often used to describe the gap between academic-based innovations and their commercial application in the marketplace. Without government funding, they will fall into the technical valley of death. Therefore, the centers aim to move marine energy further past the valley of death towards operational deployment. The third objective is workforce development for students and potential professionals. Funding internships and fellowship programs at federal departments and labs working on marine energy, such as Department of Energy, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and National Marine Renewable Energy Center, is an essential step towards creating a workforce pipeline for this emerging energy sector. While many internship programs currently exist, not all are paid, which promotes inequality in the workforce because only interns with financial independence can afford to take these opportunities. So therefore, the paid internship program will help both train college students and improve diversity in the water power sector. It is also important to fund vocational training opportunities, such as apprenticeship at dam sites. If the process to approve the dam retrofitting is sped up, then there will be a sharp increase in the demand for workers who are skilled in dam management and repairs. Currently, the Army Corps of Engineers administers a power plant trainee apprenticeship program. However, the number of graduates are not enough to fill spots at both federal dams and private dams. More educational programs will promote the growth of qualified workers, so the increased demand from the water power industry can be met. The final objective we will cover is to promote inclusion and equity within research and development for hydropower and marine energy. Research projects in these areas can apply for fundings from the Water Power Technology Office. The project applications are reviewed on a number of criteria, including project objectives, end user management, management approach, and future work. The review is performed by a panel review consisting of technical experts within the industry. Our program adds an equity and environmental justice component to the project funding application to ensure that the applicants are considering environmental justice implication of their project and making an effort to include minority representation within their research groups. It will also provide future motivation for research teams to work with minority serving institutions and tribal entities. We will also add a minority representative from these organizations to the peer review panel. This person will be responsible for evaluating equity and justice components of the project. By including minorities in the funding decisions, we can help promote diversity within the industry and promote research projects that help water power move away from its history of injustice. Overall, the program will scale up the water power sector by removing key technology barriers in the hydropower and marine energy industry. It will also ensure that they are led by well-trained employees and that they provide equal opportunities to a diverse United States populations. Create a next generation workforce that is more diverse and inclusive. By funding this program, the government is securing the clean energy future of the United States. And as a side note, the Clean Economy, Job and Innovation Act, which including this one, HR 6084, passed the House last week. We are looking forward to the future practical application. With that, next week, Sophie and her team will lead the organizational contracting and staffing plan. Thank you very much, and we are open for questions.
Okay, do we have any questions? Stephanie, is anybody?
You guys can raise your hand or type in the chat. Looks like Charlie has a question. Go ahead, Charlie.
Hi, Carol. Great presentation. I just had a quick question, a follow-up question on your decision to route the application review process through FERC. Would this be able to supersede the authority of other agencies that might be involved in the land use permitting for this? And how would you deal with edge cases where you don't have interstate electricity flow and that might be beyond FERC's jurisdiction?
So you're asking about the, sorry, I just want to repeat if I understand it correctly. It's about the hydropower retrofitting permitting?
Yeah, that's right. Is this something that's been in FERC's purview historically, or is this a new sort of power that you're giving to FERC through this bill?
Yeah, so FERC is currently responsible for granting license for building new hydropower facilities and relicensing these facilities when the original license expires. And it also performs the similar duties for other forms of energy production, including the fossil fuels. So it's completely feasible for FERC to take the sole ownership of this process.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, if not,
We have one question from Jenny.
Okay, Jenny.
Hello, Carol. Great job. I appreciate the team's focus on equity and environmental justice yet again this semester. I wanted to, I guess, ask if you could elaborate more on the engagement process with impacted stakeholders for any of the hydropower projects, like you mentioned, tribal, entities, and what is the plan, I guess, to engage in more detail?
Yes, so definitely there are two objectives within the inclusion and equity. So the first objective is that we will require the environmental justice component in your application when you apply funding to the water power technology office, so that we're knowing that you are considering these impacts that you might have on the nearby communities. And the second objective we have is we actually have the representative from the minority, tribals, or organizations. It doesn't have to be the same person all the time because circumstance may be different given different projects. And he or she will sit on the review panel to consider if our office will give funding to these applications. So there are two main solutions that we have for these questions.
Okay, we can take one more question if there is one.
Griffin has her hand raised.
Okay, Griffin.
Hi, Carol. That was wonderful. I'm just curious if you know about the energy potential of the Great Lakes.
That I don't know. I think I will definitely get back to you if I have the answer.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Carol, and thanks to the group. We're going to go straight into the second presentation. I think what we'll do is we'll do three and then take a break and then do the final two. So if my group is ready, Stephanie, let's move on to the second presentation, this one on the Defense Climate Resilience and Readiness Act.
Great, thank you. All right, it's now working. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Braverman, and I will be presenting today on HR 2759, the Department of Defense Climate Resiliency and Readiness Act, which I will refer to going forward as the DoD Climate Act. I would like to take this moment to thank my team, Haley and Andrew, for putting this presentation together, and to everyone in our working group for their support and research throughout this workshop. So on the agenda today, I will introduce the nature of the public policy problem threatening the DoD. I will then discuss how the DoD Climate Act intends to address this problem and follow with our proposed program design for the first year of the DoD Climate Act. I will conclude this presentation with a summary of our program and share our next steps for the remainder of the semester. So let's begin with the introduction to the nature of the public policy problem. The DoD Climate Act addresses the threat climate change poses to the Department of Defense and U.S. military readiness to respond to natural disasters. Each year, climate change-related disasters, including extreme temperatures, hurricanes, wildfires, and drought, cause damage to DoD infrastructure, which requires billions of dollars, resources, and time to repair. The DoD itself is a major contributor to climate change, as it is one of the world's largest greenhouse gas emitters. Over 1,700 DoD sites are currently facing climate threats. Therefore, it is in the interest of national security that the DoD adapt and mitigate to climate change. The DoD Climate Act was introduced to both houses of Congress in May of 2019. As one of the bill's sponsors, Elizabeth Warren, has stated, climate change is a national security threat, and adapting to it is essential to maintaining our military readiness. Now I will discuss the solutions proposed by the DoD Climate Act. The DoD Climate Act outlines three major approaches for the DoD's response to climate change. The first, the DoD Climate Act requires all non-operational installations of the DoD to improve energy efficiency and achieve net zero energy consumption by 2030. The second goal, the DoD must manage and assess the physical risks climate change poses to its installations. And lastly, the Act seeks to change the economic markets surrounding the defense industry to be more climate conscious through DoD budgeting, spending, and contracting. The approaches contained within the DoD Climate Act must align with the major goals of preparing the DoD and its infrastructure to withstand and adapt to climate change. Mitigation measures in the bill include increasing energy efficiency, investing in and increasing the use of clean energy sources, and conducting collaborative research to shift to a decarbonized economy. Adaptation measures in the bill include increasing the resiliency of military bases, achieving energy security, and conducting assessments and reports to track the program's progress. I will now discuss our program design, which will take place within the first year of following enactment. There are three major elements of our program design. These include changes to the institutional structure that will affect the DoD's internal processes, mitigation elements that seek to reduce the DoD's carbon emissions and reliance on traditional energy sources, and adaptation elements that prepare the DoD for the effects of climate change and seek to increase resilience. Within the first 180 days of enactment, the position of Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy and Climate Resiliency will be established to oversee the program's implementation. Equivalent positions will be created in each branch of the military in order to ensure that there is adherence across the entirety of the DoD. The DoD Climate Act requires climate-conscious budgeting. The program would allocate funds dedicated specifically to climate-related risks in the DoD's annual budget proposal. Performance management will include biannual reports to track the progress towards the major goals of the Act. Assessments will be measured by the Climate Vulnerability Risk Assessment Tool, which I'll go into greater detail on in later slides. Mitigation will begin by immediately reducing energy consumption at fixed DoD installations. The Department of Defense consumes 77% of the entire federal government's energy budget, and 30% of DoD carbon emissions are from non-operational sources. A recent assessment showed that less than 2% of DoD facilities met standards for being energy efficient. Through simple and fairly low-cost improvements, such as renovations to heating and cooling systems, reliance on energy-efficient automated and task lighting, and careful power management at workstations can quickly and easily decrease its energy use and carbon footprint. In the first year of the program, there will be significant investment in research and development of renewable energy sources, with a primary focus on developing hybrid and renewable source microgrids. This is essential for achieving the DoD Climate Act's long-term goal of achieving net zero energy by 2030. Collaboration and equity will be at the foundation of this program. The DoD will work with Black communities, tribal nations, and historically Black colleges and universities in the planning, research, and implementation of this program, as well as with local communities, both in working towards net zero and collaborating on adaptation efforts. Adaptation efforts will begin by taking inventory of what resiliency measures have already been implemented by the DoD sites, and then implementing resiliency measures at sites with the highest climate vulnerability. This will include actions such as raising buildings to prevent flooding. Within the first 6 months of the program, a climate vulnerability risk assessment tool will be developed in consultation with other federal agencies to be used to determine how climate risks affect the military's operations, systems, sites, and capabilities. The Climate Task Force will be established within the first year of this program. This task force has 3 major objectives, which are to coordinate and promote interagency cooperation, provide training on the implementation of the bill, and ensure minimal negative social and environmental impacts on all operations. The task force will include the newly appointed Secretaries of Energy and Climate Resiliency from each branch of the military, and as well as representatives from other government agencies and research institutions. In designing this program, we have worked to consider the impact it will have on current operations of the DoD, as well as the effectiveness of its elements in meeting the overall objectives of the bill. We have also assessed the political and financial feasibility of this program. The adaptation measures proposed have broad bipartisan political support, which will protect the strength of the program as more politicized activities, such as working towards net zero energy, are simultaneously conducted. In terms of the financial feasibility, funding will be accessible through the National Defense Authorization Act. There will be a significant cost at the start of this energy transition, but the maintenance and disaster recovery costs will be reduced over the long term. Thus far, we have discussed the implementation schedule for the first year of enactment. These first steps are necessary if we are to achieve the Act's major goals by the turn of the decade. In conclusion, the first year of this program will focus on implementing institutional changes, investing in mitigation technologies, and adapting infrastructure and strategies to climate change. By implementing initiatives with high rates of return, including energy efficiency and climate adaptation measures, significant progress on the DoD Climate Act's overall goals will be made within the first year. This will make way for research and development of renewable energy and hybrid microgrid technologies. The DoD's investment in the research and development of these technologies has the potential to transform the entire U.S. energy economy, given the magnitude of the DoD's presence in the U.S. energy market. Our next steps will focus on the DoD Climate Act's organizational structure, budget, timeline, and performance management to ensure a successful first year of the program. Thank you so much for your time, and I will now open the forum for questions.
Nice job, thank you. Any questions from the class?
You guys can raise your hands or type them in the chat box.
Are there any questions? Okay,
Oh, we have one question from Charlie.
okay, Charlie.
Hi, Sarah. That was a great presentation. I just have one quick question for you, which is, how accurate do we know the extent of the operational greenhouse gas emissions within the DoD? I know that in the Paris Agreement, states weren't required to disclose the amount of emissions. So are these approximate, or are we actually able to derive these from fuel purchases or things like that? Or how are we going to be able to monitor like the decrease in operational greenhouse gas emissions as we go forward?
That's an excellent question. Thank you, Charlie. So currently there are I'm not quite sure the technicalities behind their measurements, but I do know that there are current processes for measuring those kind of emissions, especially from non-operational sources, which for those who are unsure what that means, that's from fixed military base installations. So we know where the DoD is getting its energy from, and then we can measure from those sources the emissions from there. But that's why this bill has proposed the development of the climate vulnerability and risk assessment tool, so that that tool can be used for measuring each military's fixed installation emissions. That way we can move towards a more a less carbon intense market. And if that doesn't answer your question fully, I'm happy to send you more information. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Other questions?
We have a question from Griffin.
Okay, Griffin.
Hey, Sarah, that was great. I'm curious about whether you feel hopeful that this sort of action can happen within the Department of Defense.
That's a really good question. And thank you. I think it's a good point, because I think when we hear, the environmental protection, especially when it comes to military operations, given that the military has such a big carbon footprint, is it actually possible is a good question. I think that there is a lot of hope, because there are many people within the military who are very interested in this, because this is a security issue, right? We are already seeing many bases that are affected by climate change disasters. So it's in their best interest to be working towards climate resiliency. And I think that there is hope for it. If this bill does not become approved, which currently it is just waiting in committee, these are all options that can be applied in other areas without a passing of an act. But we're hopeful that this will happen within the next year.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, well, Sarah, very nice job. We will now move on to our third briefing from Professor Hill's group on Wildlife Conservation and Anti-Trafficking Act. So if you're ready for that, let's go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cohen. So thank you everybody for being here today. My name is Ariella Levy, and I will be presenting the midterm briefing for the Wildlife Conservation and Anti-Trafficking Act of 2019, HR 864. Before I begin, I'd like to thank my team and our advisor, Professor Hill, for their support during this process. So the point of this briefing will be to present our analysis for how to most effectively implement HR 864. I will first briefly summarize what the bill mandates, and then review the two implementation options that we considered. Finally, I will elaborate on the option we selected. First, let's define wildlife trafficking. Wildlife trafficking is the illegal gathering, transportation, and distribution of animals and plants. It is valued at $23 billion and costs an estimated $20 to $60 billion annually due to ecosystem service losses. This bill focuses on enforcement of existing anti-trafficking legislation and strengthening of wildlife conservation acts. The bill addresses its objectives through 4 main components: a whistleblower program, an international wildlife conservation program, expansion to U.S. Fish and Wildlife officers abroad, and amendments to existing conservation acts. This bill has several requirements for our implementation, all of which our program design addresses. Firstly, and most importantly, it will come at no additional cost to taxpayers. All of the activities from the bill will be funded through trafficking fines. Secondly, the bill will only target illegal wildlife trafficking. It will not impact legal wildlife trade nor trophy hunting. And thirdly, the global nature of the bill poses various challenges regarding international relations. The bill and our program address these concerns. It will be implemented in a decentralized fashion involving the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Attorney General, and the Secretaries of State, Treasury, Interior, and Commerce. These requirements do impose certain challenges, particularly regarding the funding for the bill, and I hope to address these throughout the presentation. So we considered 2 separate program design options that address the objectives and the various challenges that the bill presents. Our first approach focuses on enforcing anti-trafficking through international monitoring, regional capacitation, and legislative measures. The second approach focuses on promoting wildlife conservation through similar tactics, but each with a more central focus on conservation. Given the multifaceted nature of wildlife trafficking, we selected a program design that focuses on enforcing anti-trafficking practices. This is the most comprehensive of our design options, as it addresses illegal trafficking practices directly and consequently mitigates biodiversity loss and zoonotic disease spread associated with wildlife trafficking. We will address these requirements of the bill with 3 pieces of legislation that are stated in the gray boxes. First, let's take a look at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Officers Abroad program. After compiling data from the Department of the Interior, we identified 51 countries where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has had or currently has a presence. These are shown in the countries in blue. As our program stands, officers are stationed in U.S. embassies and work with local governments and NGOs to build grassroots conservation capacity. This allows for streamlined efforts that target the source of the problem. Our program will build on this successful model and expand to countries with high trafficking rates of the major species of concern who have requested U.S. intervention and with whom the U.S. has positive relations. We expect to begin expanding the program to India and Myanmar, which are shown in the countries in green. We are confident this can be successful given previous experiences. For example, in Namibia, law enforcement requested assistance in stemming the illegal rhino and elephant trade in the north. A U.S. Fish and Wildlife officer with 20 years of anti-trafficking experience was dispatched as part of the U.S. Embassy. The officer primarily shared his experiences dealing with similar problems in other countries and trained Namibian police officers to help improve their conservation efforts and provide investigative and enforcement assistance with criminal investigations. As this case study demonstrates, there are already frameworks in place that we can build off of for our own program. Next, I will discuss the expansion of the Whistleblower Program. The Whistleblower Program will provide unique and valuable information that is often otherwise inaccessible. It addresses all levels of the trafficking chain, from poaching to transportation to trading. It is the first title of the bill and is essential for acquiring fines, so we consider it a top priority. There is already existing regulatory framework that sets precedent for future whistleblower legislation. These include the False Claims Act, which holds anybody who defrauds the government liable, and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prohibits U.S. entities from bribing foreign officials. To illustrate the scope of existing whistleblower program success, in 2017, $3.4 billion were recovered from whistleblower disclosures under the False Claims Act, mainly pertaining to health and military fraud. As the bill focuses on enforcing crimes that are already illegal, our program design will build upon these existing provisions for whistleblowers. Finally, our program design calls for general legislative amendments to expand current established programs. It increases penalties for wildlife trafficking, amends existing conservation laws, and establishes trafficking violations as predicate offenses. For example, the Marine Turtle Conservation Act is expanded to include tortoises and fines for trafficking turtles will increase from $80,000 to $150,000. These changes primarily rely on strengthening of current programs and thus do not involve significant administrative burden. While our program design addresses the bill's two objectives of wildlife trafficking and conservation, it does pose some challenges. It requires positive diplomatic relations with countries. These countries must first agree to each respective program component. These issues of international sovereignty are of primary concern, as it's not really clear to what degree the US can engage in a trafficking event when it is not directly involved. Additionally, the program will require significant coordination with NGOs and local authorities, as well as identifying and training US Fish and Wildlife officers. Finally, the biggest challenge is that the scale up and expansion relies on how much money is actually acquired from fines. Given these limitations, we will first enact a pilot program to troubleshoot the design and streamline efforts. Pilot programs will be implemented in countries where there is appetite and capacity, and as funding increases, these can be expanded. Despite these challenges, the program design does have various strengths. It was very important for us to find transparent ways of evaluating its effectiveness. These include various metrics, such as how much money we have acquired from fines, how many whistleblowers have come forth, and how many countries we have programs operating in. Additionally, direct communication with US Fish and Wildlife officers can provide insider insight on the success of programs, and conservation metrics can show the impact on biodiversity. Finally, I would like to briefly discuss the social impacts of our program design. Direct local involvement of US Fish and Wildlife officers provides opportunity for community-based participatory research. This can provide local, useful knowledge for conservation. Grassroots conservation initiatives have various local economic benefits as they can create jobs and promote regional capacity building. Finally, crime intervention will improve local stability, especially in places with high rates of organized crime associated with wildlife trafficking. I would now like to briefly discuss the timeframe for implementation. We will immediately begin advertising the Whistleblower Program, as the bill calls for this act to be instituted no later than 1 year after the bill's passing. We will also institute the amendments to the acts as soon as the bill passes, as both of these components will be essential for acquiring funds for other programs. Given the current pandemic, the US Fish and Wildlife Service Officers Abroad is on pause, but this will focus on a country first to pilot and troubleshoot the program. And then once we acquire sufficient money from fines and penalties, we will work towards strengthening the international conservation program and expanding our program design to other countries. In conclusion, there are widespread benefits of our program design. These primarily include targeting the wildlife trafficking program at the source, having a positive impact on transnational crime, and building local capacity to address conservation issues. Additionally, the program design will indirectly result in mitigation of biodiversity loss and prevention of zoonotic disease spread associated with wildlife trafficking. While there are initially high administrative costs, we expect these to decrease over time. With that, I would like to conclude this presentation and thank you all for listening. I'm now open to take any questions.
Very nice briefing and wonderful photos. Are there any questions?
Looks like we have a question from Rachel.
Okay, Rachel.
Hi, Ariella. Great presentation. Thank you. I was wondering if you had a time estimate of how long the pilot program will be, and then how long that will take to get to the next steps of expanding the program.
Yeah, we estimate a pilot program would ideally be maybe a year or so. We would also base it on how it's worked in other countries and how long it's taken to evaluate the success of previous programs. But it really depends on how much money we acquire from fines before we can expand.
Okay, other questions?
Karen has a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Ariella. That was a great presentation. I had a quick question about coordination. I'm just wondering how likely you think it is that the level of coordination needed for this to be a success is possible, considering today's political climate. I know you mentioned positive diplomatic relations, so I'm just wondering your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big challenges, considering it works with both international governments and NGOs that may be either internationally based or US centric. I think the coordination aspect, again, really depends on the previous relationship between the US and that country. And I would also just add that a lot of the NGOs maybe will have already established some sort of diplomatic ties that the US program can work off of.
Okay.
Dr. Palmer has a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Ariella. Really nice job on the presentation. I was interested with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service officers abroad. You talked about adding some new countries, but would your program also consider increasing the involvement of officers in existing countries, which is to say expanding programs that already exist?
Yeah, definitely. So the map that I showed earlier was stationed whether they had been there previously or were there right now, but wasn't comprehensive everybody there right now. So I think it would require a certain evaluation of what countries it would be worth reinstituting the programs in rather than expanding and sort of doing a comprehensive overview of where the highest trafficking currently is.
Okay, very nice briefing. Thank you very much for the group, from the group. What we're going to do now, we're going to take a 5-minute break. It's 9:41. So we'll resume at 9:46. At that point, we'll hear from Professor Palmer's group on the Agricultural Resilience Act. So everybody stretch their legs and go for a walk and come back in a few minutes. Thanks. Okay, everybody. I think we are ready to resume. The next briefing is from the group that Professor Palmer has been advising. And this is on the Agricultural Resilience Act. And so if Professor Palmer's briefer is available, let's resume.
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm Rebecca Purba, and I will be presenting on behalf of the Agriculture Resilience Act team. I'd like to thank my task team, Louisa and Abigail, for their amazing work on this output. Also to our Deputy Manager, Alyssa, the rest of the team, and our faculty advisor, Professor Palmer, for their guidance. Keeping a manure lagoon, a large holding tank for animal waste, is a common practice when there is a large amount of livestock. But this is detrimental to the environment when there is a high concentration of livestock. This practice releases methane, a potent greenhouse gas, which could have been and should be avoided. So what's a better solution? Pictured here is a manure separator installed at Dennis da Silva Dairy Farm in California. This machine separates the liquids, letting the solids be stored dry and thus aerated, and as a result, releases less methane. This technology has been successful in not only reducing methane emissions, but also saving energy. Unfortunately, not enough farms are using this nor have access to these resources. Therefore, farmers would benefit from a governmental program that incentivizes the adoption of such solutions. This solution is one of the programs proposed by the bill we will explore further today. Our agenda: we will review the goals of the bill, explore program design to effectively implement this bill, and lastly, examine the stakeholders of the bill. The Agriculture Resilience Act was introduced earlier this year by Maine Representative Shelley Pingree. It aims to reduce greenhouse gases in the agriculture sector by 50% by 2030 and reach net zero by 2040. In addition to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, if passed, the bill increases federal investment in research and education efforts. It supports new programs on soil health, livestock waste emission reduction, food waste mitigation, and on-farm renewable energy. All the initiatives proposed in the bill are intended to advance the goal of net zero and increase climate resilience across the sector. As this is a vast piece of legislation, today we will focus on conservation of private grazing land and alternative manure management. First, conservation of private grazing land. This program promotes managed grazing, which is a form of pasturing that grazes livestock on segments of pasture. This allows the other segments to rest and for soils to recover from past grazing. This recovery period allows grasses and other vegetation to regrow, which increases soil moisture and in turn soil stability and productivity. Healthy soils are extremely beneficial for agricultural yields, and most importantly, soil carbon sequestration. Increasing the amount of carbon stored in the soils, such as through better grazing management, is a central pillar of the plan to get to net zero emissions from agriculture. This program advances managed grazing through technical assistance and educational programs for farms transitioning from confinement and feedlot systems to managed grazing-based systems, and through dispersing grants to fund grazing land research, demonstration, and outreach projects to promote grazing across the United States. A total budget of $50 million is allocated from 2021 to 2030. The Natural Resources Conservation Service, or in short, NRCS, is an agency within the Department of Agriculture that delivers assistance to farmers through a national network of local experts. This agency currently provides extensive guidance on conservation, but without specific emphasis on climate change or resilience. Therefore, in this program design, we would create a series of regional advisory councils to advise the NRCS in creating a series of regional guidelines and benchmarks for the conservation education program. These advisory councils would include climate scientists, farmers, conservationists, and community groups. And the guidelines created will be specific to the conditions in each region and geared towards the unique challenges farms in those areas face. Finally, the NRCS will review and decide on the dispersal of the grants based on guidelines created by the Advisory Council. The NRCS has an existing infrastructure to serve local, state, and regional interests through their regional divisions in the West, Central, Northeast, and Southeast. These divisions would facilitate collaboration between the advisory councils and other arms of the agency. Currently, each NRCS regional division has a separate focus. And the Central Regional Center has the task of leading the National Grazing Land Team. This program, therefore, will require creating a new workflows so that each regional center has a grazing land team and an education team. This way, an applicant from any state would report to the regional division and can apply for grazing land management grants. Each regional advisory council will also focus on creating benchmarks for conservation education programs. Finally, all regions will then report to the National Center for annual reviews. Moving on to the second program design, Alternative Manure Management Program. The objective of this program is to support livestock methane management strategies to effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to maximize environmental benefits. This includes conversion from confined facilities to pasture-based management that eliminates or reduces the quantity of manure stored in anaerobic conditions, installing manure storage, installing solid separation systems, and other technologies. A total budget of $1.5 billion is allocated from 2021 to 2030. Farms will submit funding proposals for one or a few of the alternative manure management strategies. They will be monitored as they implement and use these new techniques, and at the end of a 3 to 5 year observation window, complete a calculation of changes to the methane emissions due to the shifts in manure management. The fund covers the costs associated with implementing and maintaining the program, with a limit of $750,000 per application during any 5 year period. You may recall the farm we spoke of earlier, Dennis the Silva Dairy Farm. It installed a manure separator, one of the forms of alternative manure management, at its own farm through funding from California Department of Food and Agriculture. A cluster of farms, say within a county, may also apply together to share technical resources and effort for both the application process and implementation of manure management strategies. This way, more farms can participate in this program. For instance, a cluster of farms may submit a joint application in order to facilitate a centralized composting facility in the county. Now, let's take a closer look at the stakeholders to better understand the potential fates of the bill. First, who benefits from the programs and initiatives included in the bill? Small and organic farms, agriculture researchers, environmental organizations, companies with values and goals similar to those of the bill, might benefit from the programming and funding by financially incentivizing the work these stakeholders already do. On the other hand, adaptation of the regulations in the bill might cut into the profit margins of large agricultural corporations or big ag, including decreasing dependence on pesticides and fertilizers, which would decrease sales for agriculture chemical producers, and a reduction of feedlots, which might increase the cost for these operations and reduce the income for feed producers. Climate solutions are moving to the forefront of political debate, allowing for optimism that we will see a resurgence of these ideals within the context of agricultural reform in the future. And it is important for the success of future legislation to conduct analysis and management simulations. We will explore possible program options throughout the remainder of the semester. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to take any feedback or answer any questions. Thank you.
Very nice job, Rebecca. Nice work. Are there any questions?
All right, Liz has her hand raised.
Okay.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks. That was a great presentation. I'm just interested, you spoke a little bit about that one farm as an example, but could you talk a little bit more about any examples of these sorts of techniques or programs already being implemented, please?
Sorry, so you were referring to the farm for our case examples, and you're interested in knowing if there are other techniques?
Well, just examples in the real world of any of these programs or techniques already being implemented.
Yeah, so actually the interesting part about this bill, most of the programs that it outlines are already in progress, like they're already being implemented. For example, the farm that I mentioned, the state of California already has that alternative manure management program. And then the grazing land is also already operating, but the challenge is it's not to the scale that we needed if the goal is to reduce by 50%. So what this bill is trying to do is collect all of those success programs throughout the United States, but then upscale it nationwide. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, other questions?
Dr. Chilred has his hand raised.
Okay, Steve, go ahead.
Hi, great talk. Just a technical question on the manure separator. You gave the example in California, which has a much drier climate than the East Coast, for example. Would it work as well in a humid environment like North Carolina that has a lot of feedlot problems?
That's a great question. I would say personally, I would probably not be the best suit to talk about the science behind it, but I would say, so the bill covers multiple projects, right? Our team are only covering 2. Last summer, we also talked about anaerobic digester, and perhaps that is something that is more suitable for different areas in the United States. So that could be a solution, say if the land is not as dry as California. That would be my intuition.
And then just another quick question on it. Does it affect the odors? Because that's another community issue that people have, is just the odors of the feedlots and the water pens.
Yeah, so I think for the alternative manure management program, I think that was sort of the goal, to make it dry so that the odor is less harmful than just leaving it as a liquid manure in the open, so that it's also less pollution to the water. I think that's the main goal of the program.
Sounds like a very good goal to me. Okay, we have time for one more question if there is one. Okay, well, if not, very good job, Rebecca. And I know, what time is it where you are right now?
It's just 9 p.m., so not too late in Indonesia.
Not too bad. Okay, well, anyway, have a good evening. let's turn to our final midterm briefing, which is on advancing emergency preparedness through One Health Act of 2019, which is Professor Rosen's group. So if the briefer is available, let's begin.
Carson, sorry, you're muted.
Carson, are you with us?
Sorry about that, everyone. I had trouble unmuting while I was controlling Stephanie's screen. So let's get started. Good morning and good evening to our international students. My name is Carson Ross, and I'll be presenting the midterm briefing for our bill, HR 3771, the Advancing Emergency Preparedness Through One Health Act of 2019. First, I'll just briefly thank my team for all of their hard work this semester so far, and Professor Rosen, our faculty advisor, for her support. To begin, I'm going to explain what is the issue our bill is trying to address, and then I'll go through the objectives of the bill, one of which is to create a One Health framework, so I'll give some context to what that is, and then I'll go through the specific legislative mandates in the bill, and then I'll explain our program design for the first year of implementation and conclude. I'd like to begin by describing a global issue that we've all been personally engaged with since the beginning of this year, which is, of course, the threat of zoonotic disease. Zoonotic diseases are pathogens that are able to pass from animals to humans. The CDC estimates they account for 75% of newly emerging infectious diseases, 80% of agents with potential for bioterrorism, and more than 2 million deaths worldwide each year. Human actions, from unsustainable agricultural practices and an unregulated wildlife trade, both of which we've heard about already today, as well as urbanization and deforestation, increase the interface between animals and people, which has led to a significant and mounting concern around human health, as well as economic costs and national security. I don't need to go very far to illustrate the severity of this problem, since we're currently experiencing the cost of lacking a national preparedness strategy. In the last 6.5 months, over 1 million people have died worldwide from COVID-19, including over 210,000 Americans. We've experienced the highest unemployment rates since the Great Depression and witnessed overwhelmed hospitals, shocks to the food supply, and most recently, our national leaders up to the highest office falling ill. HR 3771, the Advancing Emergency Preparedness Act through One Health Act, was introduced in July of 2019 with the overarching goal of creating a framework which would prevent, prepare, and respond to zoonotic diseases based on One Health principles, which recognize the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health. The framework created as a result of this bill will define the roles of federal agencies, state and local partners, and coordinating bodies to address emerging zoonotic diseases through preventative measures such as surveillance and improved environmental practices, preparation for outbreaks, like ensuring adequate medical supplies are available in hospitals and health centers, and managing an effective response with things like clear lines of communication for public health information and creating flexibility in the food supply chain. While the bill calls for the establishment of a coordinated One Health framework, the One Health approach itself is not a new concept. The integrated approach has actually been growing in influence for decades, and it's already informing national public health systems around the world. Several agencies within the US also draw on the approach, such as the CDC's One Health Office, USDA's One Health Coordination Center and APHIS, as well as the USAID program PREDICT, which was tasked with monitoring emerging infectious diseases, increasing workforce capacity, and improving international and national research laboratories to work with zoonotic infections. That is, until its funding expired this past summer. Right now, we have existing One Health efforts in specific agencies, But many agencies that aren't traditionally thought of as being connected to public health, like the DoD, Department of Commerce, or Homeland Security, are very much impacted by the threat of zoonotic disease. So in order to be truly prepared for emerging threats and have an effective response, each of these agencies needs to institute One Health into their activities, and there needs to be coordination among One Health efforts across agencies. So the bill mandates that within 1 year of enactment, the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Secretary of Agriculture, as well as many departments and agencies which are named in the bill, shall develop, publish, and submit to Congress a national One Health framework for coordinated federal activities under the One Health program. But what will the framework entail and who will be involved? According to the language of the bill, the process will start by identifying what already exists within the government in relation to One Health and disease preparedness. So that would include the offices I mentioned on the previous slide. These agencies need to establish 10-year federal goals and priorities, specifically around improving scientific understanding of the interconnectedness between human, animal, and environmental health, identification and surveillance of priority diseases and disease emergence hotspots, prevention of transmission between humans and animals, improved coordination and collaboration for data sharing, engaging in joint fieldwork and research efforts, as well as goals focusing on workforce development around prevention and response. The enactors of the bill will then need to identify and expand partnerships to include additional stakeholders who aren't specifically mentioned in the bill, such as Indian tribes, NGOs, academic institutions, private entities, and then they'll identify best practices moving forward. So the language of the bill appears to assume a top-down approach, whereby the secretaries lead the development of the framework and dictate the actions taken by those directly below. In this case, that would be the federal departments named in the bill, like the DoD, EPA, USAID, and many others, which would in turn manage state and local agencies. However, a top-down approach can be slow to integrate state and community-specific emergency response efforts. We've actually seen these inefficiencies play out during the COVID-19 pandemic, whereby the CDC and White House have been leading a centralized response. So to address some of these challenges, we also explored a bottom-up approach, which has the advantage of tailoring response to specific emergency needs from the communities from which the assessments originate. But this approach can be time-consuming, resource-intensive, and can lead to a high risk of developing contradictory subplans. So for these reasons, we decided on a counter-current approach. In this case, information is shared in a centralized and decentralized fashion, where the secretaries co-determine the approach and rely on information received from below to create actionable steps. Some of the advantages of this approach include having clearly defined vision for advancing emergency preparedness, faster delivery of One Health assessments, and a reduced risk of duplicating public health threat communications during emergencies. Of course, there are some disadvantages to this model as well, in that it necessitates a high level of coordination and self-regulation across agencies, and the agencies will need to develop deep functional and technical understanding of the One Health approach. And they'll need to be committed to an open exchange of information and resources. So with all these moving pieces and various lines of communication, what does our counter-current approach look like? At the top, coordination will be conducted by a federal steering committee. The committee's activities will be overseen by the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Secretary of Agriculture as outlined in the bill, and will be made up of members of each of the agencies described in the bill. Within each of the relevant agencies, there will be a coordinating One Health office. The office will involve membership from each agency's various departments and a liaison to communicate with local and regional offices to keep the agencies up to date on events taking place on the ground, like potential outbreaks or new developments in research. As I mentioned, several of the agencies already draw on the One Health approach, but expanding One Health offices to all agencies and departments will improve public health practices and awareness of the complex connections between human, animal, and environmental health and their impact on all sectors of society. The bill, HR 3771, is built on the 3 pillars of prevention, preparedness, and response. So there will be a specialized task force dedicated to each of these goals. The task forces will include members from One Health offices from each agency relevant to that work, as well as membership from local partners. For example, the Prevention Task Force would include representatives from government agencies like USAID, APHIS, the CDC, FDA, among others, to conduct surveillance activities, communicate potential health risks, and develop broad spectrum drugs. But it would also work with non-government partners like UC Davis, Columbia University, and the EcoHealth Alliance, all of whom were invaluable to the success of the PREDICT program, which identified over 1,000 strains of diseases with pandemic potential. And bringing in outside expertise can help ease the burden on government agencies while adding an additional layer for monitoring and accountability. This model allows for the interagency collaboration to take place at both the highest level and the steering committee, as well as on the ground in the task forces conducting fieldwork, training, and research. This is the heart of the countercurrent approach because the multiple levels of collaboration across sectors allows for faster and clearer communication, which is an absolute necessity for effective emergency response. Put briefly, One Health is a simple and powerful concept with a complex implementation process. While there are some limitations to the countercurrent approach, overall, it's able to address the complexity of needs in advancing emergency preparedness across sectors at the local, state, and federal level. It allows for greater flexibility through interagency collaboration at multiple levels and integrates the One Health approach into every agency and department's internal system. Over the next few weeks, we'll be expanding our program design to include a specific staffing plan, organizational chart, a budget, and a calendar for implementation. Thank you, and now I can take some questions.
Very nice work, Carson and group. Any questions from the class or our guests?
You guys can raise your hands or type them in the chat box.
Okay, I guess the group's all questioned out. Is that right?
Seems like it.
Okay, Carson, very nice job.
I have a question, sorry.
Okay.
There's Jenny.
Hey, great job, Carson. I guess I just wanted to know, can you elaborate on the, I guess, the challenges of implementing this program? You already mentioned a lot of them because we have a good example of real life what we're going through, but the challenges of implementing it and yeah, in terms of, and what you went through in terms of how to choose the program design you decided on, and if maybe if the bottom-up approach is one of the solutions to how to address the challenge given the current situation of how things are being implemented.
Sure, there's definitely no shortage of challenges with this issue. I think that the fact that it's so relevant right now is sort of a blessing and a curse because we are able to see a lot of the things that do and don't work in emergency preparedness. So the really big focus of the framework is supposed to be that it encourages collaboration across agencies. And so what that says to me is that there are a lot of politics at play just because you know, we've seen what it looks like when agencies are or aren't willing to collaborate and openly share resources and information. So I think that was really what our focus was, is like, how can we create some like backups so that there's collaboration on different levels yeah, I guess to make sure that if it doesn't work at one stage, it is going to work somewhere else. So I think that was a really big focus for us. I do think that there's some promise just because we've seen how much it costs not to have an emergency response. So I think that it is sort of encouraging people to take the issue seriously, and that could mean that people will be able to overcome politics and collaborate on a level that needs to happen in the future.